Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live-streamed discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, but you can just call me the Kid.
And I'm Scott Daly, and the script says here that I'm supposed to pretend to be the judge, but I'm going to tell you something, Matt. I really just don't want to do that, so I'm just going to not.
Don't feel like inhabiting that particular character.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy Friday. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday evening. We see some people in chat already. I see some familiar, I was going to say faces, but I realized that their names. The only familiar face I see here is Matt's beautiful face over there. So we see Chris, we see Matt Westward. Hello, you two. How's it going? If there's anyone in the chat for the first time that has never come to a book club, hello and welcome. As we said, I'm Scott, that's Matt, and we are Doof Media. We make podcasts all about the stories that we love. We also arrange and organize this monthly book club, which Matt will now explain for us wonderfully and expertly.
Well, each month, Scott and I select 5 books from a pool of books submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all the supporters on Patreon over at patreon.com/doofmedia, and we let them vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it.
And then we meet here on the last Friday of the month, or, not that today. It's not that, but
the second Friday
we're
of the month.
slowly trying to get back on schedule.
Yeah.
We spend an hour or so chatting about the book and just talking with you all about it. Before we get into this month's book, we normally right now would have what we call a live attendance vote, where, as Matt said, we usually let our patrons vote for the book, and then we also let anyone who attends the book club also have an extra vote. But March, for those that don't know, is our biannual We Pick 'em month, in which Matt and I wrestle the reins of democracy from our viewers and our supporters and pick the books ourselves. So Matt is up this time, and he has selected a book for us, so there will be no vote this month, and we will announce that book at the end of the episode. So look forward to that. And now you have to stay the whole time. Ha!
I'm sure the judge would approve with us taking command of the podcast in this way.
I'm sure you are right. All right, Matt, tell me all about this month's book.
This month, the book selected was Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, and the summary is as follows. Blood Meridian is an epic novel of the violence and depravity that attended America's westward expansion, brilliantly subverting the conventions of the Western novel and the mythology of the Wild West. Based on historical events that took place on the Texas-Mexico border in the 1850s, it traces the fortunes of the Kid, a 14-year-old Tennessean who stumbles into a nightmarish world where Indians are being murdered and the market for their scalps is thriving.
Oh boy. Wow. Mr. Cormac McCarthy. I think he's an optimist, Matt. That's what I have to say about this book.
Yeah, he's a cheerful fellow. I like to hang out with him.
Yeah. All right. So, Matt, I want you to tell me what you thought of this book. And while you were doing that, you folks listening at home, tell me, had you read this book before the book club? Did you read it specifically for book club? And regardless of when you read it, what do you guys think of Blood Meridian? Matt, how about you?
I guess I'll preface by saying I have been dreading reading about this book for probably 15 or 20 years because I've been aware of its existence and sort of known what it was, and known that I was going to get around to it someday. But I knew that the book club would have to force my hand. So here we are. So this book that definitely belongs on side by side with any of the other great literary novels that we've read on this book club. The prose I found to be just, exactly what everyone says about Cormac McCarthy and what everyone says about this book in particular, where it's like magic. It's like an incantation. It just kind of wears away your mental defenses and transports you. And I kept finding myself just loving, every sentence. I would be like, that was a great sentence, and then I would just like the next sentence, that was an amazing sentence. I guess the only thing that like surprised me was, well, no, that's not true. Lots of things surprised me. The main thing that surprised me was that the narrative actually really pulled me in several places, and the characters pulled me in a few places. And I didn't really expect that. I expected us to have more of a sort of distant connection to the story. Well, I'm sure we'll go into all that kind of stuff later, but for now,
Yeah.
what did you think of this story?
I think this is a brilliant novel that I enjoyed quite a bit. And I say I should have put that word "enjoyed" in quotes because I don't know how much one can actually enjoy this book. As Chris is saying the same thing in chat as I say this. Um, yeah, I struggled with this book a whole lot. In that I think structurally, it is structurally difficult to read, and it is thematically difficult to read. Um, I think the structural thing that we kind of talked about this on Kingslingers this week, but Cormac McCarthy does not use dialogue quotes. He does not use the quotation marks for dialogue in his novel. I don't think he does it in any of his books, actually. And this is something that you really didn't have to directly deal with via the audiobook, but I definitely did. And you do eventually get used to it. You just kind of get used to the book doing that. But in the first 50 to 100 pages, there were definitely moments where I just lost track of who was talking and to whom. And that made it kind of a slow going for me at the very beginning. You eventually adjust and you get on the book's wavelength. And so the second half of the book took considerably less time for me to read than the first half. And yeah, I mean, I think this is a really fascinating novel, and I completely understand why it's held in such high regard. I think it's doing a lot of things that I think are really fascinating from like the perspective of you and I who talk about like conventional storytelling techniques, and how this book like is at seemingly at every turn like eschewing those techniques, and yet it still functions, which I find really fascinating because I think we maybe get into this a little bit more, but one of the things I find so fascinating is like you as the reader of a novel, I think, are constantly looking for someone to empathize with and someone to care about and someone to root for. Like that is kind of in any novel you're reading, you want that. And I think the fun thing about this book, if you can call it fun, is I think you're constantly trying to do that, and like the characters like keep dodging it. It's like you're trying to put a pin of good guy on a character, and every time you think it's going to be the nope. Nope.
Yeah.
Actually, all these characters are terrible, and yet the story still functions, and yet you still care. Like it is really fascinating to me that I hate all these people. I even hate the kid on some levels because he's very complicit in all this horrible stuff that happens, and yet I was still bought in. I think it is a testament to how our desire to empathize in story just kind of works.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's obviously, okay, I'm going to stop saying obviously because nothing about this book is obvious actually. But it seems to me that the choice of using a 14-year-old character as the protagonist in this story is intentional because it situates you largely in the point of view of a character who has like some element of innocence or humanity left in him while he's surrounded by all of these basically monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Like the nicest person on the gang other than him would be Toadvine, um, who's a guy who like has been mutilated and tattooed with his crimes, literally. But as you say, the book never tries to be saccharine or in any way ask us to consider typical moral sense and say like, well, can we forgive the kid for his involvement because he was swept into this by by this monster, the judge. I don't really think the book is asking us to do that. I think the book is sort of actively pulling you into this plane of total immorality.
Mm-hmm.
um I'm going to avoid like referencing other literature because and here's the thing, okay, and I don't mind if you reference other literature, obviously. The point is, everybody who talks about this book, they get stuck talking about the references to other literature,
Sure.
which is fine, and that can be a fun conversation. That's not really how I like to talk about books, though.
Mm-mm.
I'm fine knowing about that and thinking about it, but I like to understand it on its own terms. Like, why is it working on me? Like, okay, cool, this is a scene from Moby Dick that he's reinterpreted, but like, okay, but why does this work
Yeah.
the way he
Yeah.
did it, right?
No, I totally
Um,
agree. I totally agree.
yeah. So the one thing I'll say is like, there's a Nietzschean bent to the story. The idea of the judge as a Nietzschean character, who's this like beyond morality character. I think I think that's crucial to what I think the book is saying about morality, or the existence of the judge, and sort of the dyad of the judge versus the kid as these two poles. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't have it all sorted out. Like, I'm coming into this conversation with a lot of like amorphous blobs of thoughts in my head that I hope we can hash out a bit.
I agree. I think I finished this book up actually just this morning, and I'm still tossing and turning through it in my head. So I hope that this is another one of those episodes where we've kind of, by the end of it, at least semi hashed out our feelings and formed a cohesive thesis on what this book is doing. But maybe not. I mean, this might be a book that is just going to take years of considering and conversations around to do that, and I'm completely fine with that as well. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing here that Chris says it was a very interesting book, and I'm glad that they read it. Bent Westford said they had no idea what they were getting into, just picked it up on a whim, and whoa, Nelly, yeah, that would be a heck of a book to just pick up on a whim. Seems like Steve didn't like it as much.
Yeah, so it's funny. Okay, so Steve is sort of criticizing the what you could regard as purple prose. I happen to think that the prose was almost uniformly, like, very, very precisely crafted to evoke like exactly what he wants to evoke. There were maybe like two places in the story where I was like, that's a little bit much, Cormac.
I think there were several places of that for me, but I always just kind of chuckled about it and just moved on.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, that wasn't my main experience. But I could totally see somebody having that experience and just being like, oh my God, just like, I get it. I mean, it's funny because like others have remarked that like how much of the book is just descriptions of men riding horses across a desert.
Yeah.
In some different way, and it kind of never ceases to be entertaining, which is shocking to me, actually.
This is the weirdest thing about this book, and I think I actually said this to you earlier in the week. I think I was maybe about halfway through the book at this point, and I was like, is this just going to be dudes riding through the desert and then coming up on people and murdering them and then moving on? And like, yes, like yes. And it's really interesting because there's a part of me that says that I got it 2/3 of the way through the book. Like, I got it, and I really didn't need any more at that point. It's like, I see what you're doing, Cormac. I got it. But then I don't think I did. I think honestly, part of what the book is doing is that this is relentless. That the journey through the desert is relentless. That the suffering is relentless. That the cruelty is relentless. That we keep doing this. We're going to do it again. We're going to do it again. We're going to approach another city that's not actually a city. It's just this hollowed out shell of a place that people used to live, and everyone's dead there before we got there. And it's like every town or settlement that these people come across is either abandoned and dead, or they're about to make it abandoned and dead. And like the relentlessness of that over and over again, I think, is what McCarthy's doing, is how he's pushing you into this mode of, oh my God, this sucks.
Yeah.
The world sucks.
I'm reminded not of a book that this book references, but of a book that references this book, where a certain character says to the other, do you think there's a hell? And then the first says, yeah, I think this is it. Of course, I'm talking about the gunslinger, which I paraphrase that a bit. But the point is, it is hellish. I mean, there's some... Yeah. People have remarked that there's a lot of Miltonian imagery. There's a lot of associations between the judge and the character of Satan. Although I think it's, in my opinion, a bit reductive to just say like the judge stands in for Satan. I think it's more complicated than that. But anyway,
absolutely.
It's hell on earth, right? Like that's. So often it feels like you're like these cursed, damned souls roving endlessly, and like even I mean, man, okay, this is tricky to talk about, but like the book does not humanize the people that they butcher. Yeah, the only people the book humanizes are the gang members, which is so interesting to me. They will like they'll run into this band of Apaches, and the Apaches are depicted as basically demons,
Mhm.
and they murder all of the Apaches, or maybe the Apaches murder all of them except a few. Goes back and forth a few times. The Apaches are bad, and then we see like, oh, and then there was, you know, Bob, and he had an arrow in his leg, and he was so sad, and his pain was terrible, and we can really feel for Bob, and the kid feels bad for Bob, and the kid's gonna pull the arrow out of Bob's leg. What isn't that nice? Oh, look, some more an innocent tribe
Yeah,
of people
just an
who are
agricultural tribe, yeah,
yeah,
that's sitting
let's
there.
let's murder and scalp them. And then and it's like you're it's like whiplash of like
Yeah.
it's hammering away at your sense, like your ability to empathize properly.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
It is. You're so right. It's just I'm going to keep using the word relentless all evening because it is just absolutely relentless. And I think one of the things that McCarthy does really interesting to me, you know, you talked about the Miltonian kind of wandering through hell. The geography of this book to me was very difficult to follow. Like part of me really wants to like have a clear indicator of like where roughly in the United States Mexico border area our characters were traveling at any given time, and I think the book just doesn't let you do that. Like it'll use cardinal directions occasionally, but it's like the book hides from you so much, like where the characters are going, and like do they have a goal of where they're gonna get like it will hold that from you until the moment they get to the town and be like, yes, this was there, this was the town, we were actually heading here the whole time. And it's just you never get a grip on like where they are in relation to anything else, and it creates this feeling of you reading, watching them travel are just completely lost. You're just completely lost. Where are we going? What are we doing? Why are we going there? What are we? And then like they start killing the Mexican citizens and scalping them, and you're like, is that gonna work? Is that like isn't because people gonna notice that? And they're like killing the army, and you're just like, aren't they gonna? They just don't seem to care about any of it. Um,
Yeah,
like this is a novel that I felt very very strongly that kept trying to get a hold of it and grip it, and it just squeezed out of my fingers every time. It just like I felt like I was constantly chasing it, and I don't
yeah.
think that's a bad thing.
No, I totally agree. I mean, this is one thing I think we were talking about earlier, the idea that the kid is the main character. He's the I guess technically the protagonist. It is sort of a classic coming of age story
Hmm.
that is subverted in certain ways, but in certain ways it just is a coming of age story.
Sure.
Um, and yet we very often are not in the kid's head. We're just sort of floating with the gang, or you could argue that a lot of the time we're sort of following Glanton because we get a lot of kind
Yeah.
of specific. You know, it's interesting. Sometimes I wonder if it's like, are we still in the kid's head, but the kid is watching Glanton, or are we just with Glanton, or
Man,
are
he just
we?
disappears for huge stretches of
Yeah,
the novel. He's
yeah,
just
yeah,
not referenced at all. He's just not like, and to the point where you forget that he's even the protagonist until the novel shoots back to him and has him react to something. You're like, oh yeah, he's still in the group. I forgot
yeah.
about that.
I think, I would have to reread the book at least once to kind of nail some things down, but I feel like the book almost never shows what he's doing during these massacres.
Hmm.
In fact, the only times can think of like one time where it shows what the kid is doing during a massacre, and it's like like some dude stumbles out and he's got a lance through him, and the kid like walks up to him as if to offer him help, and then Glanton just shoots the guy in the head because it's like, he's obviously mortally wounded, and
Hmm.
it's like, okay, so this is like the one thing we ever saw during a massacre was the kid sort of trying to show somebody mercy, but we know that he must be just murdering people right and left along
Oh
with
yeah.
everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how the camera cheats you of actually seeing what must be happening. Um,
Well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting in two different ways. I think the one is absolutely it hides from you the fact that he's doing all this stuff. But on the other hand, it also hides from you the fact that maybe he is reacting horribly to the absolute atrocities they're committing. But we don't act, the book does not allow us to see that either. And
mhm.
again, it's like how should we feel about this kid? How should we? Like we have to spend a lot of time talking about the ending, because I think that is some of the most fascinating stuff in the book, because we have the judge like kind of becomes our antagonist at the end of the book, and the last 50 pages, as both Bent Westward and Chris are talking about, the last 50 pages are the most plot heavy part of the book, probably, when we have this kind of conflict between these two characters. um and I don't know. Let's talk about it, Matt. Like, what is what is the judge? Let me ask you a simple question.
Yeah.
Who What is the judge, and what is McCarthy saying with the judge's character and the way the novel ends?
So I don't actually know how to answer that except in a Doyleistic fashion by saying the judge is McCarthy's attempt to have a avatar of uh, the the spirit of senseless war in mankind,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Like I would have to really choose my words carefully to say exactly what he is, because it's because you can be like, is he supernatural? Unclear, and it's like I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the fact
kind
that
of,
that the kid is now like in his 40s by the end of the book, and he runs into the judge, and we're kind of told explicitly that the judge has not changed or does not look older, from the moments the kid saw him as the kid, seems to lend credence to the supernatural
yeah,
reading.
and also
Um,
just he's like this giant infant. You know,
yeah, yeah.
there's one thing about it that I think is really, um, sorry, I just totally spaced on what I was going to say. That's rarely happens, but sometimes it does.
That's all right. Okay, so let's try to figure this out, because so the end of the movie is basically the judge kind of tells the kid that like all the speechifying he's been doing over the course of the novel hasn't been for all the men, it's just been for him. Just been for him. He's trying to teach him the ways of the world and how all this stuff works. One of the most interesting speeches that I enjoyed from him was this idea of morality is a thing made up by the powerless to allow them to seek power, and that like the only real power is violence, and the idea of morality is just some made up bullshit that humans did. And I thought this was really interesting. And I'm going to say something, I don't know if it's controversial, but like I thought it was very interesting in the ways in which the judge was sometimes made you go, huh. you know
Yeah, yeah,
like, it's not that I'm saying he was right or wrong in some of the stuff, but like he is obviously the most despicably awful character in the thing, and the like constantly McCarthy is doing a reverse save the puppy literally sometimes, with him, just to remind you of how absolutely despicable this character is. And then he starts like waxing philosophically about the world, and you're just like, hmm.
yeah.
you know
Yeah, right. I mean, because you don't have a good argument against him.
yeah,
But I think also you're sort of being led to see like, well, this is the natural consequence of actually taking this philosophy seriously.
sure,
Like,
sure.
it's one thing for you and I to say, yeah, maybe morality is all made up, but like that doesn't mean that I'm gonna go throw a puppy into a river.
True.
Like it's and even that statement, like I think that's the ultimate rebuke to that sort of Nietzschean view of morality. It's like, no, like that's not true. Like we have this moral sense that is
Yeah.
just part of us, that is not something that, like, I didn't adopt it because I was told to. I just don't want to kill puppies, and in fact want to preserve puppies. It's a natural part of who I am. I mean, it's a very cynical view of humans that this book is portraying, to say that we're just this race of murderers basically. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
we also like love our children and stuff. It's just, okay, well, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to oversimplify it, because the book also has like peaceful agrarian societies that they then murder.
Yeah, but they
So
get wiped out. I mean, that's the
yeah,
interesting. I think you're absolutely right that humanity. I like philosophically, I fundamentally agree with you that humanity can be monstrous and terrible, and often is, and continues to be. But we can also be incredibly kind and good, and I don't think that is something that we've like decided to do out of some kind of selfish desire. I think there is some innate. I don't know where it comes from, whether it be spiritual or like just some sort of you know a genetic
hmm
predisposition. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I think it is interesting that Cormac never tries to show that other side of it. And the kid doesn't actually debate him ever.
Mhm.
Like their final debate, like the closest he gets to actually debating him is when the judge is talking about the dance of war, the dance of violence. The only thing he says in debate him is like any dumb animal can dance. Like the judge is talking about like there's only one and there will only be one dancer, blah 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 blah. And he's like any dumb animal can do this. Like there's nothing special about this actually. But for the most part, he's just every barb that the judge throws at him, he's just like, nah, you're stupid. I'm not
Yeah.
afraid of you. It's not even worth the time of having an intellectual argument with this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. He'll just be like, I don't like your craziness. I mean, that's another interesting thing about the kid is he's highly uneducated in contrast to the judges, you know, like being the most educated man in the world, basically.
Yeah.
And he can't even read. He carries around the Bible toward the end, but he
Hmm.
can't read it. And and it's almost like again, it's like I don't know what, if anything, the book is saying exactly, because it's like, well, does that mean he's innocent? Like he is an innocent by being ignorant? Like there's protection from the sort of sophistry of the judge by just being like, I don't know about any of that shit, but whatever. Because somehow even the judge insists that the kid still has this streak of um, clemency for the savage in his heart,
Hmm.
which it's funny because even as the reader, we're like, oh, he does really. I don't see that because
Uh-uh.
he went around with the gang and killed everybody, but like what he felt a little bit bad about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's literally it, actually. Like, I think the judge is like, it's annoying to me that you still feel bad about what we're doing.
Mhm.
That like
Yeah.
that's what's bothering the judge, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I do I love what you said about the intelligence, and Scantron in the chat is pointing out that the kid is kind of at least at the beginning of the novel almost pure id.
Hmm.
Like he's just innate survival, kill, drink, kill, sleep, repeat. Um I think there is a really interesting thing here with the idea. Like, I love what the summary that you read said about how it's subverting the conventions of the Western novel, because I think it absolutely is. Because one of the things I knew about the story going into it is that it was a Western, right? And then you see very quickly it's like, oh, this is not this is not actually a Western at all. This isn't how Westerns are supposed to go at all. Um, I think this is also subverting some ideas around intelligence too, right? Because the judge is this character who is the most intelligent character in the entire book. He's learned. He knows every language. He understands law. He understands science. He's curious too. He's intellectually curious in a way none of the other characters in the story are. Like he's constantly, learning about the flora and the fauna. And I actually love his description of it was like I have to know everything because I refuse to live in a world in which I have not given explicit consent for things to exist. So I need to learn about them so I can decide if I want them to exist or not, which is just fucking insane. But it is this direct comparison to the kid who is, as Scantron pointed out, more id, not smart at all, not intellectual, really isn't concerned with any of that stuff. And you would think that normally your inclination would be like, well, the smarter you are, the more ability you are to rationalize and understand and grow toward some sort of moral kindness or something. And it seems to be the exact opposite, right? It
Hmm.
seems to be that if we're going to pretend this person is just a human being that's experienced life and become this person, the smarter he got, the more isolating he found it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's basically right. He intellectualized himself into basically becoming Satan.
Mhm.
Um, and the kid's ignorance maybe protects him, but then he ceases to be the kid and becomes the man, and maybe that's he loses the more than just the name, the symbolism means that he has lost his innocence, and then that's when the judge is able to kind of get to him. I'm still
Yeah.
unclear on, so and I think it's timely to talk about this because Chris is bringing up the idea here, like what exactly happens at the very end there,
Mhm.
which I think is like the most commonly discussed feature of this book is like, what happened?
Yeah, well,
I,
it's left intentionally ambiguous as to
yeah.
what the final fate of the kid is.
Hmm.
Although we are led enough to believe that it was something so utterly horrific that even this book, which goes into great detail about a vast number of horrific things, can't even bother to show us. So
Uh-huh.
it must be just awful.
I love it. I like what Chris said. I mean, I don't like it in the sense that I hate it, and I'm not even sure if I believe it. But it's interesting to think about the idea that the the girl goes missing at the end of the book, the girl whose bear it was, and maybe there's an implication that it was the kid that killed the girl,
Interesting.
and the judge is now embracing the kid as his disciple. I gotta say, I don't really buy that. Like, I thought it was pretty. I mean, it's interesting to think about for sure. Like the judge just like murders people like for fun, or he's probably a serial killer basically, because like you're always hearing about like children or whatever like
Yeah.
disappearing suddenly and then being found dead throughout the whole book, and it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, okay, the judge is some kind of freaky serial killer who just enjoys doing this. So I just assumed that the judge did this once again.
Yeah.
Although it's you could read it that way because the text it's like I admit, it's funny now that I'm thinking about this. There was like a moment where I was like, so the judge, like he kills some random girl and then like immediately afterward kills the kid. Like that's a weird, like that's it's a little bit much even for him. Um,
Is it? Is it though?
I don't know. I don't know. The thought passed through my head where I thought it was weird that it would be like why, like why do it that way? It struck me as a kind of a strange choice. So
Yeah, I mean, well, whenever you get to a point in a story where they're going to leave something intentionally ambiguous, you immediately have to ask yourself the question, why? Like, why did McCarthy choose to leave this ambiguous? And I think it's because he wants you to draw your own conclusions about what the story is actually about. Because if you decide that the judge has finally decided to kill the kid because he finally gets so frustrated with his inability to corrupt him that he just decides to kill him, then it's seen as kind of a certain kind of victory for the world of good and morality. That this kid, this ignorant kid, was able to resist the temptation and the allure of this world of violence and death to a certain extent.
mhm.
And you carve out just a small little bit of it. It's a very small little bit of victory in a book where the judge is dancing and naked at the end and saying, I will always be here. Right.
Mhm.
You grab onto the little nugget that you can. But if you look at it the other way, and you look at it the way Chris is saying, some people hypothesize, then it's the opposite. That it's the kid eventually succumbed to that and became that to a certain extent, and then McCarthy's whole view on the world is it is inevitable, right? That this is the way the world is, and the world will inevitably be this way forever, because even the most innocent person is eventually going to succumb to this. And I think there is some interesting stuff around the children that the kid runs into on the plains, where he ends up murdering a child, right, for
Mhm.
sneaking up on him with a rifle. And like, you do see a little bit of uh, a cyclical nature of this whole thing, because these were orphaned children who were cruelly dealt cards by this world. They're just doing this job on the plains, and they come across this man. They have this interaction with him. He kills one of them, and then, like, what's going to happen to them now? They're probably
Yeah.
going to fall in with some group and do some violence, and it's just the cyclical nature of this thing.
Yeah. So did you notice that they said like that kid's father had been murdered by a crazy man in the woods and buried in the woods, and it was a reference to the story that the judge told about you know the man. Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about, the sort of almost the parable the judge tells at one point, where it's like a man is going through the woods
Oh,
and there's a
the traveler that like runs across the family that.
there's a family, there's like a harness maker that lives in the
Yeah.
woods, and he like kind of morally chastises the harness maker, and the harness maker is like greatly moved by his criticism, and then walks with him into the woods, and then murders
Kills
him
him.
and
Yeah.
buries him.
Yeah.
And and um and it's like I forget what exact lesson is sort of the critically agreed upon lesson from this, but basically it's like both the children of the harness maker and the children of the traveler are shown sort of textually to have become violent murderers.
Hmm.
And it's just the way in which, like, whether you're the victim or the perpetrator, it creates a legacy of violence that is inescapable, which is,
Yeah.
seems about right for this book.
Yeah, it certainly does, and I think this is the I enjoyed this book. This is the thing where I kind of push back against it because, like you, I do think the world is incredibly cruel and can be awful at times, but I'm not quite as pessimistic as this book seems to seems to make the world. Like I don't know, like I think it's really interesting. That I think this book it man, it both shows the beauty and the cruelty of nature.
Hmm.
It's really interesting to me that like the prose just paints like the beautifully paints these deserts and landscapes and all these things that they're traveling through this world, but it also shows how incredibly cruel it can be. Like it's not just the people around them that are making their journey through this wilderness tough. It is the wilderness itself. And then so I think part of it's like this idea that like, man, the world is tough on its own, and then people come in and we make it a million times harder. But it is really interesting to me that like it just seems like like even if we carve that little nugget of hope out of the end of it, it just seems to me that the lesson of this book is that people suck, war is inevitable, we're all just going to continually murder each other in this horrific cycle, and there's nothing anyone can really do about it. Actually, it's
Yeah.
like, well, I don't agree with that.
Right. Well, so there's a couple of things that I want to say to that. I mean, number one, and this is the thing I wanted to say a minute ago that I blanked on, is that McCarthy makes it very hard for people like you and me to just be like, you're being too pessimistic, because the Glanton gang was real.
Yeah, no,
Glanton was real.
yeah.
Even there was even a guy named Judge Holden who vaguely met that description, and they did all of these things.
Hmm.
So many of the events in this book are literally taken from the memoirs of the people who were involved, just massacring people, massacring innocent people, scalping people just because they had black hair, basically.
Sure.
Um, Nightmarish stuff. Just like you can almost imagine Cormac McCarthy coming across the story and becoming giddy and thinking like, this is perfect. This is the perfect bones on which to build a sort of literary epic, because you can't just shrug it off the way you can shrug off pure fiction and be like, yeah, that was very moving, but ultimately it's all a fabrication, because some of it's a fabrication, a lot of it's not a fabrication.
Yeah, I mean the massacre at the ferry
Hmm.
was real.
Hmm.
Now whether or not like Glanton and his gang like made a pact with those natives and then betrayed them, I don't know if that part's real or not. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. It is kind of very clever. He seems to be like building his case and then using real world stuff to support it. And I agree. And I guess what I would say is that like have no I have no qualms with the idea that humanity is capable of shit like this. That of course we are. Like we do it constantly. We have this incredible ability to other people and to dehumanize. And once a human being has been dehumanized, it is no longer an issue for people to do just the cruelest possible thing to them. And this book shows example after example after example after example of that over and over and over and over and over and over again. Totally buy into that. Totally agree. We have this incredible capacity for violence and destruction and cruelty. I guess what I would say is that this book does kind of choose specifically to ignore the flip side of that coin. That it isn't interested in it, or it believes it's irrelevant to see the other side of humanity, which is that we have this incredible capacity for kindness and generosity too.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because the, I spent most of my life in Texas. Not that right now I'm looking up like maps of where this story is supposed to take place, and basically it's all like very very west south Texas and then
Hmm.
Mexico. Um, so it's not really the area that I'm familiar with,
Mm-mm.
but the reason I bring it up is to say like I didn't see a lot of murdering and horrible stuff happening, and we're just a scanty 150 years later,
Hmm.
and we're treating each other pretty well. You could get all cynical about that even and say, yeah,
Yep.
but we're built on a our houses are built on the bones of, and I'm like, okay, like, yeah, I mean,
True. Yeah.
it's true, but like we're trying to be better. Every generation is trying to be better than the one before it and trying to take care of their children and leave a better world. And so, um,
Yeah. Yeah. It is really interesting because like I think in the same way that this being a real event like protects it against an optimist saying, oh, this would never happen, it also being 150 years ago seemingly protects it from a person saying, oh well, that's the way things used to be, like
mhm,
I think this is one of the things that like um slavery movies do a lot. And the reason they're so popular with the Academy voters a lot of times is because we can look back at that and be like, oh man, that was awful. I'm glad we fixed all that and don't
yeah,
have to worry about it anymore, and we can pat ourselves on the back. And I think that's by choosing a real event that happened years ago, you can kind of just be like, well, it's a good thing humanity isn't like that anymore. And I think in many ways we are better than
mhm,
this, and in many ways we're still struggling with the same types of problems that leads to behavior like this,
yeah.
all around the world. So
So,
yeah, I man, I don't. I wish I just knew definitively what McCarthy wanted me to take away from this.
yeah, I mean, I not that I know the answer to that, but I do think I can kind of step back from this exchange that you and I are having and kind of make fun of myself and be like, you're so desperate to reach for some way that you can make this all be okay
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
not have to just like face the horrible brutality of it, which is really what the whole
Sure.
book is about. It's denying you any of that, comfort blanket of being able to be like, but ultimately in the end, it was all for a greater cause, which I would say most westerns, most things of the western genre, like they have kind of the grittiness and the rough edge, but then there's like the sheriff character, and and he's going to do the right thing, right? And it's like you don't have any moral salve to tell yourself a story about how it's actually okay that all this bad stuff happened, or or even justice was done for all of the people that were wronged. The closest thing to justice is just like eventually the Glanton gang's killed, but that certainly doesn't feel like justice. That's just like, yeah, I mean, I knew that was going to happen because they were tempting fate at every turn. In fact, the fact that they lived as long as they did is almost maddening. This is something I wanted to
Yeah.
say a minute ago, but like my strongest emotion for like 2/3 of this book was like, God, I hope these guys die soon because I hate them. Um, and then the judge survives the whole book, and is probably still with us.
That's
So
not a fun thought. No, I actually love that because you're absolutely right that the optimist in me and the literary critic, I guess we'll call it, in me is taking this book and trying to shake out a motif, a reason, an understanding, a basic 2 sentence blurb that I can say this is what this book is about. But I agree. I mean, it might just be simpler to say this is a book that forces you to look directly at the worst possible side of what humanity is, that and it doesn't allow you to look away. It never gives you an out. It never gives you an excuse. It never says, oh well, at least we have the kid, because we don't at least have the kid. Not really. Like, he is possibly the best possible person in this story by the end of it, but he's still not great either.
yeah,
And so it is just this thing where McCarthy's saying too often we look at the worst possible thing and we do exactly what I'm doing, is saying, yeah, there's that, but there's this over here too. And his argument is, no, 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 no. No, we have to look at this. We have to acknowledge this. We have to at least live in this world in which things like this happen and are possible, and we're totally capable of it, and possibly will be part of us for all existence. That we're there's never going to be a time in our lives where at least a small part of this isn't part of who we are.
Hmm.
Um, and you're just going to have to fucking deal with that. There's
Yeah.
nothing we can do about it. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're both doing right now could be called moralizing, which, we're sort of been trained to do because we've like most of the books that we cover, that's that's a that's a good way to grapple with them. They're kind of asking you to ask these moral questions. And this book is like, nah, there's no moral questions, there's no morality, there's just blood and dust and the evening redness in the west. And it's all just death. I mean, what you just said about like what do we have in the way of beauty? Well, the beauty that we have in the story is actually all just nature. The beauty of the landscape, and it's like all the humans bring to the landscape is ugliness. It's almost like it leaves you with this feeling of like it would be better if there weren't any people.
Yes. Yeah.
Genuinely, it's like, well, when we're looking at a landscape, it's beautiful, and when people are doing things, it's awful. And I kind of just want the people to die, and I just want this book to just turn into descriptions of desert, moonlit nights and weather events, because that would be a lot more pleasant. I don't know if he's doing that on purpose, but I like the thought of it though.
No, I like that a lot. You're that is absolutely correct. That like it would just be better off if we weren't here at all.
In the world of the
Um,
story, at least.
in the
Yeah,
world of the story, yes. No, I don't. I don't actually believe that in
yeah,
real life. I like existing. Turns out.
I do too.
All right. Geez, we kind of blew through this one really quickly. Anything else you wanted to specifically talk about? I feel like there's a lot more to dive into here, but I'm struggling to come up with anything myself right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll like kind of on a meta level. Like one reason why it's hard is normally we would kind of go through different characters and talk about how we feel about the different characters and so forth. And it's like I guess there's a character named Brown in this book, and there's a character named and there's Glanton, and he sucks, and Toadvine sucks. I mean, the judge, we already talked about the judge, and he's just a mystery, so you can't really nail him down. I mean, that's the thing. You could talk for hours about the judge, but like in a conversation like this, it's like, yeah, he's really, I guess he reminds me. I think this is like an archetype that McCarthy likes because he kind of reminds me of Anton Chigurh, in the sense that he's this, unstoppable Terminator like figure of amorality, and like you could call
Mm-hmm.
Chigurh a kind
Mm-hmm.
of judge actually because he does the
Sure.
coin
Yeah.
flipping thing. So I think this is like a concept that McCarthy enjoys.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I did see some. I was definitely aware of Anton Chigurh as I was reading this novel and that character. Um, I like what Scantron's saying here about the biggest interactions between human and landscape in this novel is when the judge makes gunpowder, like ravages the landscape to just
Hmm.
make another weapon of violence.
Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a volcano.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very cool. That's one of those bits of the story where I was like, oh, this is like a really cool story inside of this book that barely has a narrative. So McCarthy can write a story when he wants to. I mean, I think we've both read The Road, right? Chris is asking if we read any other Cormac McCarthy books. We both read The
We
Road.
did both read The Road. Yeah, that's it for me. That's all. I've read The Road and this, and that's it.
Yeah. And then we've watched No Country for Old Men, and we watched
The Counselor,
The Counselor, which we talked
which
about.
is which is another like I do wonder with McCarthy, like when you look across these works, it is just this incredibly pessimistic view of existence, right? Like
Hmm.
The Counselor is a movie in which everybody loses, nobody wins, people are cruel, and it's gonna fuck you over in the end. Um, the same with No Country for Old Men. It's a movie about like the idea that it's a story about the idea that like we can't even understand the level of evil that people are capable of. Um,
I,
and The Road. is awful.
Yeah. Both the counselor and No Country are almost kind of a slap in the face to our statements about like, hey, everything's great now though, because it's like you've got these narcos that are basically still functionally the same people as the Glanton gang were. Um, so you've got beheadings down in some of these places. So it's depressing. I'm depressed now. I knew it was going to happen, but it took
I
longer
am
than I
depressed.
expected.
I'm really depressed. Um, Scantron asks, what any thoughts about the name of the judge? What God? What was the fucking name of the judge? I'm blanking
Judge
on it.
Holden.
Holden.
I thought that was his real name.
With the character that the character is based on. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
I think that's his real name, and I mean, I think he really was a judge too. But I mean, I think that's the delightful thing that McCarthy has done with this novel is I don't want to write it off as just like, oh, well, there's no meaning to it because it's a real name. It's like, well, no, obviously there is. Like, obviously he constructed the story this way, and he situated his like Miltonic figure in a character who he then called the judge,
Yeah.
and then this guy sits in judgment of everything. Um,
Yeah, I wonder like that is so true, and I don't think we've talked about the judge name convention quite enough, because I wonder if there's a like he does certainly some despicable stuff himself during the course of this novel, but he also is just like there observing people do really despicable stuff too. And I wonder if there's like a version, an interpretation of this character. Scantron, this is exactly what he wanted us to talk about. So, okay, great, perfect. I wonder if there's an interpretation that like he's only responding and uh, following suit in what he's observing. Like he's here to like judge humanity, and he continually finds us wanting, or like what he actually wants out of everything is for us to prove him wrong. Maybe.
hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely didn't think of that. I was going a very different direction with it. So what I was thinking is like ultimately, scripturally, there's only one judge and it's God. And so for this guy to be the judge, it's like he is wrestling that authority away and saying, you know, I am the one who judges what, deserves to exist on the face of the earth. Nothing, that which exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. And I'm going to chisel off cave paintings and I'm going to kill things because I'm the one who judges whether they are deserving or not. Um, there's that moment early on when the kid is like, "What's he the judge of?" And I think it was the ex priest that's like, "Don't ask, like don't." Like as if this is a very important question, right? That we're supposed to be asking. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing my optimism like rear its stupid ugly head again. That I'm like desperately trying to like find some semblance of goodness out of this thing. That I think your explanation is probably closer to the intended one, actually.
well, I really like your explanation because it wasn't what I was thinking about, like what this book is saying, but I actually think that it's consistent with. I mean, because it's also kind of pessimistic. You could say where it's like if you let's just kind of clean slate and say, okay, maybe the judge is this like reflective being, and then you put him in the midst of humanity, and he becomes this monster. So what does that say about
Mhm.
humanity?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. I don't know if that's intended. Whatever, but I do like it. I do
Yeah,
like it.
yeah, me too.
Man, these people suck.
Yep. Um,
It really was just moment after moment of like, come on, guys, like, come on, like, I know you're monsters, but like, did you have to do that and fill in the blank for what that is? Because it could literally be anything.
yeah, just
I, I'm kind of fascinated by like the brazenness of a lot of it.
uh-huh.
Like, where they just walk into a town and then they'll like see the Mexican army like across the town from them, and the Mexican army is just like, hey, what's up? And then they just kill them. Like they just
Yeah.
murdered them.
There's a lot of stuff like that where I was genuinely like, why'd they do that?
Yeah,
Like,
because
because they were, but like even in the logic of like if you're Glanton, like aren't you guys working like aren't you currently on a contract for the Mexican? Like is this a No Country for Old Men situation where they're like, well, we want the scalps, so we're going to kill these Mexican soldiers so that we make sure that we get all the scalps and we get all the credit,
yeah.
which is a totally insane thing to think, but I can actually buy these people behaving that way.
Well, and I think that is an interesting thing about the formation and the structure of the book is that McCarthy never reveals that as like he so often hides motive in all these random events of cruelty because I don't think he actually wants us to know the motive of all these things. Like
Mm.
I think the motive is irrelevant. They're doing the cruelty no matter what. But I agree with you. There's multiple times where I was like, now why did you do that though? Like at least we can say with some of the like the horrible murder I can't believe I'm about to say this the sentence but the horrible murdering of the agricultural Native Americans, like at least you can go, oh, is they just want more money,
Yeah.
because they're going to take their scalps instead of the people they were hired to kill, but this is easier so they're going to do that. So at least like I have some semblance of rational greed to pile onto it, you
Right.
know.
Right.
But yeah, so often the other choices, like there is none of that, and it's just yeah, I just did this because I felt like it.
Yeah.
Like when the judge specifically like rescues that Native American kid, and then like carries him around with him for like 2 days, like feeding him and helping him out, and then one day like apropos of nothing just like goes rides out of the group and then comes back with his scalp, and it's just like what what the fuck? What was that?
Yeah.
What was that? Why did you do that?
Yeah. It's part of me is like, does he enjoy doing fucked up things for their own sake? Like, but I'm
Mhm.
like that seems a little bit more of like an edgelord thing that I just wouldn't expect of the judge. It's more that he just doesn't put any value on anything, and he just like is like, okay, I'm tired of the baby had novelty, and now the baby no longer has novelty, so I'm gonna kill it like just on a whim and never think about it again, which is more kind of monstrous, I think, and less like he's doing it for the cred or whatever. Um, yeah, it's
I'm
it's
sad.
um yeah. I for some reason I keep thinking about the first interaction between the kid and Toadvine. I think it's
Mm.
Toadvine. I need to reread the book, honestly. But he's just like going down some stairs, and Toadvine mouths off to him, so he kicks Toadvine in the face, and they fight, and one of them almost kills the other,
Yeah.
and then they're like, "All right, we're friends now." And it's like pointless, and like at no point does the book delve into either character's head to explain like why they did that. Neither why they decided to get into a violent fight, nor why they decided that they're friends now. It's like it doesn't matter, doesn't require explanation.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting how little like being friends does for you in this story as well, because like one of the things that's interesting is that there really seems to be no sense of camaraderie against amongst these men anyway. You know, like
Mhm.
one of the things that I think you want to latch onto is this idea that okay, so they're awful and terrible to everyone else, but at least like there's this real sense of like group cohesion amongst these people. But that's not true either, right? Because like first of all, the second their leader dies, they all just like turn on each other and start killing each other. And then like people just like desert all the time and just leave, just walk away. And like when someone gets injured and it's like, hey, can anyone help me get this thing out of my leg? And everyone else is like, no, fuck off. I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. You deal with it yourself. And like the kid being the one person that actually says, yeah, I'll help pull an arrow out of your leg is seen as like this huge significant thing, and these people care about each other really. And
Yeah.
there's I guess some like you could argue the kid and the ex priest and the kid and Toadvine are like slightly closer, but not really because I don't know like sort of like I guess the kid like picks up Brown's ear necklace And that's
Uh-huh.
like a an ode to his friend, maybe. I
Sort
don't know.
of, or
Sort of.
some kind of connection to his past, and like
Yeah.
it's almost like he's trying unsuccessfully to have some kind of meaningful connection to all the stuff that happened, but he doesn't really know what to do with it.
Hmm.
It's just like this nightmare in his past, and he carries around this grisly memento of it,
Hmm.
but I don't think he knows what to do with it either.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, you know, even
But he
the
spends the last of his money on it, right? So it's obviously like important to him
yeah.
in some way, which is
Yeah.
it's really fascinating. Because
Yeah.
I think you're right. He just gets it to get it, and I don't think he knows what the hell to do with it.
Yeah, he's really not a philosophical character. It's just it means something to him. He doesn't want to. It's like the last vestige he has of this horrible chapter. Which I guess that's what's interesting is it's a horrible nightmare, but he wants a memento from it, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
you would think maybe he would want to put it behind him and never think about it again, but he has like it's a part of him. He like that's the kind of person he is, right? Well, like we said before, he participated in these massacres. You know, you just mentioned the character of the ex priest who we haven't talked about. Um, and he's fascinating because he's another character who's kind of a counterpoint to Holden, and he's always like warning the kid about the judge, and muttering to the kid about how the judge is so awful. But the ex priest stays with the gang the whole time to the end, and almost certainly is participating in all these massacres along with everyone else. Like it's not like he's this moral beacon. Um, he's a huge hypocrite, is what he is actually,
Hmm.
because he's riding along with the gang, doing all of the same things the judge is doing, while he's saying saying to the kid like, "Oh, you watch out for that guy. He's bad. He's bad news. That guy's evil. All right, yep. No, one more scalp. Yeah, scalp that guy. Yeah, bring me that scalp. Yeah, yeah."
Oh my god.
A
Is anyone else depressed?
little bit.
Yeah. A
Well,
great, a great novel. It is though. That's the thing. Is that's I'm fascinated by it. I think it is. It is really great. It was tough to read, certainly. So Bent Westward is asking a question that I'm not sure I have an answer to, but he's asking what is the significance of the idiot in the cage. Um, I don't know, because it's interesting the things in which the judge like chooses to take along with him and he doesn't.
yeah,
And I think the same is true with Glanton. Like I thought the one fascinating thing about Captain Glanton was his horse and his dog,
yeah,
and like his severe loyalty, and he treats these two animals better than literally anything else he treats in the entire world.
yeah,
Um, which is really fascinating. But to get back to the question at hand, I don't know. I think I kind of like what Chris is saying. Another weird little trinket for him to hold on to. Just is like, isn't this weird? I'm gonna hold on to
yeah,
this,
yeah.
because I certainly don't think he like cares for the man at all.
Yeah, no, I think it's a novelty in the same way as like some bird that he saw that he wants to write down, that he wants to sketch in his ledger.
Sure, yeah,
And maybe he kills the guy, maybe he just leaves the guy in the desert because that amuses him more, or literally leaves him in the desert because he just doesn't care at all. He's just like, okay, I'm done with this. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like he would have any kind of special feeling for that character. It's also interesting to me how the text is so kind of brutal, where it's not like the text refers to the using the language the idiot, and calling it,
yeah, yeah,
um, and just all this language where it's like the text in the frame of the story is dehumanizing this poor human being. Um,
yeah. I do think you're absolutely right, because there you could see a version of the story in which we make clear that all the characters are awful, but the narration always attempts to humanize the terrible people that are having these things done to them, and it really doesn't. Like,
mhm,
I think you're totally right that the Native Americans we see are never really humanized in that way. Like, I guess you could kind of say sometimes the narration itself like calls out a tragedy. Like there's a specific line I'm thinking of, was like where they slaughter all the people in a town and they just have wiped the town out, and the narration is like, and then like in 1 year all the record of them will be completely washed away and no one would even remember that these people even existed. And that's like some sort of like cursory acknowledgement that they were human beings, right? But yeah, I mean, in the moment, in any of the actual sequences, it's always the savages, the idiot. Of course, like we're using horrible slurs for black people, and then like using those to label every other kind of person, like any kind of inhuman, subhuman person, we're dropping the N word for them, right?
Yeah.
And so like it, it's it's cruel all around. There's no outlet. There's no moment that it's
Yeah.
not cruel.
Yeah, that the use of slurs was just like pervasive, and again, it's
Mm-hmm.
not just like, oh, the characters are using the slurs. It's like the text itself refers to groups of people using slurs, and this is published in 1985, so it's clearly it's not like oh, this was written, of the times or whatever. It's like, no, this was McCarthy like pulling you into this horrible like worldview. I think. I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to like, it's kind of what we talked about a bit ago, where the only people who are really shown any sympathy at any point are these horrible people, these horrible Glanton gang members. And by saturating the prose itself with slurs and their sort of worldview, it pulls you into almost identifying with them more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's what he's trying to do with that.
Yeah, definitely. While also having you hate them to death. Like I
Yeah.
really hated all these people. I really did.
And maybe they hate themselves.
Yeah. I think I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think they do?
I don't think they're happy people.
No.
I don't think, I mean, I think they're miserable, hopeless sacks of shit who know that they're damned, either in a spiritual sense or just in a very practical sense of like, your life is not going to get any better. And so they're just living one day at a time. Like that's why they behave the way they do, honestly, is that they don't value
Mm-hmm.
life. They don't value their own life, really.
Yeah.
Um, they don't care about anything, and thus they're able to do these horrible things.
Yeah, I mean, there's no long term thinking. There's no long term planning. I really like the idea that even like the money that they're getting from the scalps that they're taking so cruelly from innocent people is really only just they'll get to the city in which they exchange the scalps for gold, and then they will just stay there until they've spent all the money just drinking and whoring around, right?
Yeah,
And that's it. That's their life. They're not. It's not like, oh, I'm just doing this until I save up enough money, and then I'm going to quit doing this horrible thing, and I'm going to move out west, and I'm gonna buy some land, and I'm like there's earlier moments like when the kid gets up with the general, I think, who's decided that the Mexican American War actually isn't over, and we're just gonna go murder some people, and the government's gonna somehow thank us for this. At least they're like, oh well, like anyone that signs up with me, you'll get a parcel of the land that we win back from these horrible savage people, and that like at least there was that, right? When he gets in with Glanton's gang, there's not even any of that. It's just, we're just going to kill these people. We're going to get some money. We're going to spend the money on booze. We're going to get wasted. And then we're going to go do it again.
yeah, yeah. That's exactly, you talked about the repetitiousness of the book. That's
Yeah.
that's what it's bringing you into their state of mind, where you're just
Mm-hmm.
like, you sort of stop even asking the why question after a while. Like we mentioned a minute ago, like every once in a while we'd be like, why did you do that? But at a certain point I really did stop asking. I was just like, it doesn't matter. The reason why is because it doesn't matter to them
Yeah.
anyway, one
Yeah.
way or the other. So why not, actually?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good question. And maybe that's what we can kind of leave this conversation on, is this idea that obviously like the reason these people are this way is because everything they've experienced in life is this way, and they've
Mhm.
been kind of pushed and forced into this mode of existence by circumstance. And so it's this idea of like, are we violent, destructive people innately, or is it just like, I guess it's a chicken and egg question, you know,
Hmm.
like are we just carrying forward some initial level of violence and destruction, or is this who we are innately, removed from all that?
Yeah, I think that's all in there. I think these are what we're meant to ask.
Yeah, I
I
don't know the answer.
yeah, me neither. All right, that was great, everybody. Good job.
Good job, everybody. Way to read that book. um
I'm always really glad when I finish Cormac McCarthy books because I'm like, thank God I don't live in that world or that time
mhm
or that story.
mhm mhm
I'm never more. I'm just like relieved. It reminds me of when I finished The Road, and I was like, oh my God, I just had to like touch things, just feel happy to be alive.
Do you think he ever like watches comedies?
He says that there's no story worth telling that isn't about life and death.
Well, true. I think that's generally, well, I don't think that's broadly true. I think there's plenty of stories in between those two poles, but just because you're talking about life and death doesn't mean you have to be like, and everything is terrible.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
I don't know.
He's definitely a very serious person.
He is certainly that. All right. Ben, you can't just throw that in at the very end, Bet Westward. You can't just. Yes, Roland is the kid. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think we've beat this drum quite enough, Matt, but I do think at least part of uh, King's construction of his universe maybe doesn't come directly from this book itself, because I think Roland predates this book. Like, I think this book came out in 85. It says here, so um, but influenced by, certainly, right? I think they have. I guess they have a similar joint influence.
I'm so confused now, Scott,
What?
because I would have bet $1 million that The Gunslinger was heavily influenced by this book. This book came out after The Gunslinger.
Yeah, Cormac McCarthy stole this whole story from Stephen King. Clearly.
Okay, well, now I got to go recalculate some things in my brain.
um. Yeah, no, I just think they're both borrowing from a common, like, that's absolutely what McCarthy is doing, is taking like the common Western archetypes and kind of punching holes in them and turning them out and making them, because there's so many heroic Western stories of the band out to stop the evil savages, right? That's like such a common Western, not so much anymore, but in the
Yeah,
heyday of Western stories, that was like
yeah,
the the drum that was beat the most, was this idea of like, oh, those horrible savages, we have to go stop them, we have to defeat them. And it's definitely turning this on its head. It's like, okay, but what if the horrible people are actually the one killing the savages?
yeah.
Yeah,
Like Wolves of the Kala. There's another
yeah.
one for you.
There you go. And I love that he just drops at the very end of this book. He just like, McCarthy's just like, all right, and before we go, here's the point where we murdered all the buffalo in the whole country. There you go.
Uh-huh.
Just gonna drop that in for you,
Yeah.
just in case you forgot. We did that too. We
Yeah.
killed all the buffalo. The end.
No, you're totally right. It's the greatest hit. It's like we kill all the buffalo. Here's the exploitation of all the people in California and the people who are trying to go to California to make their fortune,
Uh-huh.
and just speed run all of the heinous shit that happened in the
Yep.
in the 19th century.
Great. Awesome. Love it. All right. So that is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Matt, you picked the book for next month. Is this going to be a more uplifting book?
I
that you
hope so.
picked?
I've heard that it is. I hope I haven't been misled.
Okay, so next month, as we said, it's our We Pick a Month. Matt has selected the book for this month, and it'll probably be familiar to some of you because it has been featured in some of our polls before, but did not quite make the cut. But that doesn't matter, because we are the boss, and we say that twice a year we get to choose. And Matt has selected. Matt, what book did you select?
I've selected Cloud Cuckoo Land
By Anthony Doerr?
Doer, maybe. I
Doerr.
don't. I don't know.
We'll figure that out.
We will.
But that's not funny, Matt. That's not funny. You can't just do that.
I'm saying things in the chat.
He said The Road is next month's book in chat. So yeah, next month's book will be Cloud Cuckoo Land. I'm actually looking forward to this as well. This has been on my want to read list for a while. We will. So if you look at the calendar right now, we are 3 weeks away from the last Friday of the month, which is the 31st of March. Because it's the 10th right now, and I believe Matt is traveling on that day, we're actually going to have book club on the 7th of April this time. So we're not quite back on our regular schedule just yet. Hopefully by the end of April, we can get back on our schedule of actually doing it on the last Friday of the month.
But, we'll get it all sorted out by the end of the year.
We'll get it sorted out. The important part to know is that April 7th is the date. We'll be meeting here at 9:30 to read Cloud Cuckoo Land. I am excited. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things.
So get the book, read it, and join us here again next month. Thank you, folks, for coming. We had a little bit of a smaller audience this time around, but that is absolutely okay. Maybe some people just decided not to be depressed, which is certainly a fine and healthy decision that I kind of wish we had done as well.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where it's totally understandable that the audience was small, but we appreciate those of you who stuck with us.
Yeah, we absolutely do, and we hope you'll come around next month for it. If you are listening to this on the pre-recorded audio that is released on our podcast feed, because yes, I am doing that again. You can stop asking me to do it again. I'm doing it. Please consider joining us on the live feed next month. It's a lot of fun. I think the people here can attest to that at least. So join us there.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for hanging out. If you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, then please head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/Doof Media and consider donating to support our organization at any available level. You'll get access to vote for the books that we talk about each month on the book club, with a couple of exceptions here and there, as well as a bunch of other cool, exclusive, not depressing features. So go check that out.
We talked about the Lawnmower Man on our Other Levels of the Tower podcast this month, and that is certainly not a depressing story.
That was lighthearted and wacky.
All right. If you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us, of course, you can always find us on Twitter at Doof Media or email us at doofmedia@gmail.com. You can, of course, go to Reddit as well. That's what is the Reddit website again? reddit.com/r/Doof Media. And you can post there, and we'll try to connect with y'all there as well. So that's going to do it. Remember, next month, Cloud Cuckoo Land, April 7th, 9:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. I think daylight savings time is in 2 days. I don't know which central time. I'm just going to say Central Time. We'll see you all next month.